All right, so in this video, video number 4 from chapter 4, is a really important video to get the basics of. This idea of cellular respiration is going to come up not only again in the muscular chapter, we're going to talk about it you'll talk about it in Bio 211 when you're talking about in the respiratory system and the urinary system, when you start looking at cellular respiration and how energy, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, I should function. So this is a really important little video, this idea of cellular respiration to get a base understanding for. So cellular respiration, which is the breakdown of glucose, the main thing, is going to occur, as it says, 3 interconnected reaction sequences. And they are 3 steps. One, again, you heard me say I'm trying to work on, I'm doing it at home with just a little mouse pad. So it's 3 steps, and there are 2 phases, all right? And we're going to come back to this, but the 3 steps are glycolysis, then it goes to the citric acid cycle, and then the electron transport chain. The first step, glycolysis, which is the first phase, is referred to as anaerobic because it does not need oxygen to proceed. But once we break down glucose, if oxygen is present, then the breakdown of glucose will be taken into the mitochondria, where we will start the second phase and go through the second and third step. The second phase is called aerobic, and that means with oxygen. So I need to have oxygen to get into the mitochondria, but once I get into the mitochondria, then I can get into step 2 and 3. Now, these reactions are going to occur once it starts, it's all or none, so to speak. It is once I can get into the mitochondria, both these steps will happen. So let's kind of look at some of these. And as it says here, also in the previous chapter, when we're talking about enzymes, we talked about the metabolic cycle, a pathway, a metabolic pathway. Now, cellular respiration of glucose requires a supply of glucose, obviously, and then to have it fully functional, I need oxygen. Right? So when we do this, the products of cellular respiration, the products of using oxygen to break down glucose, are some pretty familiar things: carbon dioxide and water. Right? So we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide and water. That's part of the cycle. I know the Lion King sings about the circle of life, but this really is the circle of life, right? In the process of breaking down glucose, we are going to release ATP and heat. Now, one other thing that you won't see here is there's going to be, as this happens, we'll end up having kind of a decrease in pH or an increase in acidity. But the 2 big things that I want to point out here that will be good to remember for later things is carbon dioxide and heat. Because as you look in future chapters, as you look at how oxygen is carried on hemoglobin, the things that cause hemoglobin to let go of oxygen are an increased level of carbon dioxide, a decreased level of oxygen, which obviously if I'm using oxygen, it's going to decrease, and heat. The other one is an increased acidity, which you'll see later on. But just kind of pointing out that the product of cellular respiration is going to cause a release of oxygen, which is needed for cellular respiration. So it's a cycle. Anyway, anaerobic respirations, as it says, do not require oxygen. They only make a little ATP, really. The net is only 2. Aerobic, once we can get into that mitochondria, we can make a bunch of ATP. And that is why the mitochondria is referred to as the powerhouse of the cell, because it literally is the powerhouse. If I can get into that and use it, man, the product, the amount of ATP we produce skyrockets. Now, just to remember this, we talked about a metabolic pathway. Well, this is a metabolic cycle. And what it's saying is that after we get through with all of this stuff, we go through these many steps, the enzyme replenishes the thing needed. So it is this kind of perpetual motion machine, so to speak. Now, this is showing the breakdown the whole way. So we've got the glycolysis, citric acid cycle, and then the electron transport chain. This big giant thing here is meant to represent the mitochondria. Now, all I want you to know here at this point, again, I want you to know them in order: glycolysis, citric acid, electron transport chain. I also want you to know that glycolysis is anaerobic, and it's a reaction that happens in the cytoplasm. I want you to know citric acid and electron transport chain, the second and third step, need oxygen, so they're called aerobic, and they happen in the mitochondria. Now, that is the base of what I want you to know. Now, glycolysis, again, is a pretty complicated thing. It says there's a series of 10 reactions. I am not worried about all of these reactions. What I want you to remember is glycolysis, all right? We said lysis means to break down. Glyco is talking about glucose. So glycolysis is simply breaking down glucose. It happens in the cytosol, inside the liquid of the cell. So as soon as it comes in, boom, it's going to be broken down. It basically breaks it in half. Now, when we go through this, it calls it the phosphorylation of glucose. I just want you to know it's breaking it down. We will end up having a few byproducts, and you'll see this one byproduct is pyruvic acid. Again, I'm not going to test you on that. The pyruvic acid, if I have oxygen present, it can go into, it'll change and go into the mitochondria. If oxygen is not present, I produce what is called lactic acid. This is why if you exercise or do something, like let's say you're out of shape, and I'm not saying that you don't have to be out of shape, but let's say you're out of shape and you decide I'm going to go to the gym and you start working out that the first day after, in general, you're going to be sore because your body's not efficient at that point in handling oxygen. So you're going to start running your machine, your body, on anaerobic respiration, which does not produce a lot of energy. And so I build up lactic acid, which is, in a cool way, it's going to help break down the muscle tissue a little bit in order to repair it, which helps you build it, which also helps you have more special molecules you'll learn called myoglobin, which hold oxygen, which help you be more efficient on using it. So it's this cycle of, even though it's bad and it feels bad, it is preparing you, if you stay with it, to get more cardiovascular in shape and be able to use oxygen better. So glycolysis happens in the cytosol. It does not require oxygen, so it's called anaerobic, and the byproduct, we'll just know, gets into the mitochondria if oxygen is present. Now, as it says here, if it doesn't, this kind of goes over what we just talked about. If oxygen is not present, lactic acid builds up. There is only a net gain of 2 ATP per glucose. So imagine only getting 2 miles per gallon, and then we'll kind of compare it to what we get when we get into the mitochondria. So aerobic reactions, again, now this requires oxygen. Now, I am not concerned about you knowing pyruvic acid at this point, but I would want you to know that the end result is called acetyl-CoA. It means acetyl coenzyme A. This is what starts, this is what gets into the mitochondria and starts this process, right? So at this point, think about this. At the end of glycolysis, if oxygen is present, I have acetyl-CoA. If oxygen is not present, I have lactic acid. Now, at the end, it's kind of a spoiler alert. When we start breaking all of this down, if we can use aerobic respiration, we get up to 38 or 36 ATP molecules per glucose. So 2 miles per gallon in anaerobic, 36 miles per gallon in aerobic. So it starts with the citric acid cycle. Again, this is a long chain of events. I am not worried about you knowing. We used to kind of get into NAD and FAD. Those are kind of biochem. I'm not worried about that. I just want you to know the first thing is called the citric acid cycle. It is sometimes called the Krebs cycle. You might have heard it called that, but citric acid cycle is the more correct term right now. this kind of shows it as a very complicated cycle of events that go on inside of here. I am, again, not concerned about that. All I want you to know is it is step number 2. It's actually the first step of the aerobic pathway. And as this is doing its job, think of it kind of like a chop shop in a way. It's going to start putting out these high energy electrons, high energy little molecules. And what's going to happen is we'll see in the electron transport chain, they get kicked out and stuck in this little area between the inner membrane and the outer membrane. So the electron transport chain, we have what's called NADH and FADH2. They carry the hydrogens and the high energy electrons into this little system. Now, I'm not worried about NADH and FADH2, but I just want you to know the third step is called the electron transport chain. And this is where you're going to see ATP really get produced. This is like hitting the jackpot. And so we have a special thing. I showed it in class, ATP synthase, which is literally a molecular motor. It is a turnstile, and as these electrons that have been trapped between the two membranes, they get pulled out. They turn that rotary turnstile, and every time it turns, they've got 2 arms. The turnstile's got 2 arms. One arm's going to grab a ADP, one arm grabs a phosphate. And as it turns, there's a little bump in the little bar that it rotates on, and it causes those arms to push together, and it forms ATP. It's really amazing. If you get a chance, watch a YouTube video of ATP synthase. But anyway, so this is how it works. And so glycolysis, the first step, is only going to produce 2. The citric acid cycle, the first step of the aerobic respiration, the second step overall, only produces 2, but this thing, the electron transport chain, the last one, it produces 28. And so this, like I said, is like hitting the jackpot. The electron transport chain is the one that creates the most. And this is kind of trying to show how it works, but without seeing the whole scheme of things, this doesn't make sense. I'm not worried about you knowing this. Again, I only want you to know on this, for this, the electron transport chain is the third step in all 3. It is part of the second phase, which is called aerobic, and it occurs inside the mitochondria. And so just showing this was the first slide we looked at. So again, just remember 3 steps. First step is kind of all on its own. It occurs in the cytosol, and it doesn't require oxygen, so it is called anaerobic. If the oxygen is present, I can then use it to make acetyl-CoA, and I get into the mitochondria, and now I have what's called aerobic respiration, and there are 2 parts to it, citric acid cycle leading to the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain is where I hit the jackpot. Bing, 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 and I start making tons of, that's terrible, tons of ATP. Now, if oxygen is not present from the start, anaerobic respiration, or the aerobic respiration can't happen, and anaerobic respiration ends up producing what we call lactic acid. And so lactic acid is going to be what makes us sore, and so it is a byproduct of being cardiovascularly out of shape. So anyway, I hope this makes sense. Again, just foundational material here, 3 steps, 2 phases, where they happen, and in what order. And as we go farther, we'll start building more on this. But I hope that makes sense. Take care and have a wonderful day.